With an exit memo, what can be done? An exit memo is a technique to basically execute a final documentation at the end. So in the beginning, when you engage the employee, you had the appointment letter, or you may have had the employment contract, and standing orders may have been applicable. Now, when the employee leaves at the time of exiting on the last day, if you get this signed, it will ensure that there's a clarity on all company property being returned, all digital data of the company being returned, there being no dues from the employee to the company, there being no pending claims or violations against which the employee would have liked to complain and the employee hasn't complained. So you take the sign for that also. Then there being clarity that the employee worked for X period in this organization and the employee will fix that on his social media profile. He'll correct the social media profile and ensure he's not representing to be working in the company. Okay. Now, these kind of aspects are to be sorted in an exit memo. Okay. So these are the questions we are discussing. What is an exit memo? Why is the document required? To which categories of team members and scenarios will you apply? Let's look at the exit memo first, and then we will come back to this. Are you all able to follow so far what we are referring to? Are you able to appreciate the relevance of it? Because in many organizations, what happens, as you said, there's a single one-sided email. Sometimes that goes, then sometimes there's a full and final with just the employee sign, but then the full and final is there, but other aspects are missed out. So this is a comprehensive, all-encompassing legal instrument which ensures that there is absolutely nothing left out. I'm going to share a sample exit memo with you along with your exercise, and in your course, this is there. So let's study an exit memo and figure out what an exit memo contains. And then we will discuss some more advanced questions about an exit memo. So it is issued by here the HR. You could also have the signature of the director, but the HR head, whoever manages HR function, can issue this, okay, on behalf of the company. It is issued to the employee who is leaving, subject. Then you acknowledge the employee for their service because it's in a letter style, right? Now, there are certain exit formalities that can be executed here. Now, submission of a duly signed resignation letter in case there is a resignation happening, right? Submission of a no dues certificate. So the employee is countersigning on these to ensure that there are no further payments due, that the resignation is being undertaken. Because tomorrow you don't want an employee to say that, you don't want an employee who resigned to say that these guys had made it so difficult for me to work that I had to leave. You don't want all that nonsense happening, right? So that is why you can have a very clear process and a documentation. Sometimes an employee will leave for various reasons, maybe miscommunication within the organization, but it is clear that both parties are acting out of choice and that one person is not being fired. So you don't want these things coming up later, and if they come up, then you can say that, listen, we were not involved, the employee had resigned of his own will and accord, so we are not at fault. Because here there are two kinds of risks for an organization. One is a legal risk, and also there is a reputational risk. The exit memo serves as an instrument even to deal with reputational risk. Submission of office property. So consider this as an example. Right now, when these are submitted, it can be countersigned by the HR. Any office related documents, even digital copies. Then there will be formalities in relation to confidential information or trade secrets. So this will have the process will depend from every organization and depending on the industry sector. Now look at this: meeting with supervisor or manager and formal handover of all confidential information to the employee in connection with his or her employment, and complete the exit formalities associated with such handover, right? So in every, like if you're in sales or if you're in marketing or if you're in operations, the confidential information will differ in its nature, and the best way to give it is to return it is to meet your supervisor and then returning it and identifying in the meeting what are the exiting requirements and then handing it over. Submission of a certificate to ensure as per the format provided by the company to ensure compliance with the obligations about confidential information. So you can have a further letter that the company designs, a kind of checklist which says that these are the things to be returned. And once the employee does that, he can send a certificate, he can sign a certificate and furnish it saying that I have returned everything. Then removal of current employment details of the employee from social networking sites. So if the employment ends today, then you don't want the employee to say that he is also an employee after this date, right? Now, this is the part which is a record of completion of all the past events. Now, this memo can be an opportunity to remind the employee about any restrictive obligations under the employment agreement. So when you look at your study materials also, you will find the employment agreement template there, and each employment agreement typically has some clauses like a non-compete clause where the employee cannot compete with the business of the employer or work in a competing business or start his own business, provided this was there in the employment contract. If you issue new guidelines here which were not there in the original contract, there can be a problem here. Okay, but whatever was there in the employment contract can be pasted here. Literally, it'll be a cut, copy, paste, and then you will paraphrase it to make it clear and instructional rather than making it technical, which often happens in employment agreements. So this is a non-compete clause. Then this one is a clause which prevents you from, again, working with any of the customers, affiliates, and vendors for a period of 12 months. So non-compete and non-solicit both is there, that you will not take away any employee of the company to work with you. You will not work with vendors of the company. So if the company has a design agency, you will not give them your own design agency work. This problem had happened when, I'll give you an example of this situation. When Steve Wozniak had himself quit Apple, okay, at that time, Apple used to contain this clause that you will not work with the designers or with the suppliers of the company. So when he started a new company of his own, at that time he had to look for another designer and he could not engage Apple's designers to design the logo of the company. So this is a common clause which is there in many companies' employment agreements. Even consultancy agreements may have it. Then see, these are varieties of the same kind of agreement. In case you engage in any activity or business which is the same or substantially similar, without taking written consent, then the company has the right to claim damages for losses or expenses, which will be decided on a case-to-case basis. So one thing you must always remember is that many employment contracts tend to contain clauses which are stretched legally. Okay, they may not be entirely valid. Like under Indian law, post-termination restrictions on employment are not considered to be valid. Only during your employment you can be exclusively employed and prohibited from working with others. But unless you are in a very, very senior position, it is difficult to restrict somebody from working with a competitor. Even in a big company like Infosys, what happened was that when the CEO and COO were hired, like after Narayan Murthy left, there was Vishal Sikka and another person who were hired in top positions. For them also, the non-compete clause stated that you will not work with these 4 or 5 companies, and with everybody else you can work. Because non-compete creates a very big restriction on an employee, and under Indian Contract Act, that kind of a restriction is not considered valid because it is in restraint of trade. So now here, and then non-disclosure of trade secrets and confidential information. So you will return confidential information and any copies you will hold. And here it's written you will hold confidential information in strictest confidence. You can change, okay, the language. You can make it simpler. You can make it shorter. That is all fine. If you want to grant exceptions, the best way to grant an exception is that take the prior consent of the company. That's the best way to do it. You will not, without the prior written approval, use for your benefit or disclose to others any confidential information. Until such time you return and destroy confidential information, the company will be entitled to withhold your salary, emoluments, or other dues. This has to be checked for legal validity depending on the nature of the employee, because if you're covered under Payment of Wages Act and all of that, there are specific dates by which full and final settlement must be done. So you will not be able to hold your salary or emoluments beyond such period. The only thing that can be done is that if the employee doesn't, you can incentivize the employee and say that I will do a faster full and final if you return this earlier, right? And if you fail to have a meeting with the manager or supervisor or do all the formal handover, the company will initiate legal action against you for breach of contractual obligations. Now, how is it saying this? Which is the contractual obligation they're talking about? Assume the employee doesn't sign this. He reads this line and refuses to sign this. Assuming the employee refuses to sign this, okay, then which is the contractual information we are speaking about? We are talking about a contractual obligation under the employment agreement itself, which would have stated that all confidential information shall be destroyed on termination of the relationship or returned to the company. That kind of a contractual obligation would already be there in the employment agreement. And this clause is just referring back to that and communicating to the employee that this is what we will do, right? The company shall claim damages for loss, okay? Now, all this the company can state, but it actually really depends on whether there has been a damage suffered by the company or a loss suffered by the company. So that the company will have to prove. The entity which claims that we are owed damages, or if any losses suffered, we need to be compensated, then the company has to demonstrate that a loss has been suffered. Your obligation to maintain confidentiality and security of confidential information remains even after your employment with the company ends, and continues for so long as such confidential information remains a trade secret. We hope that you had a fruitful journey and it's fine, and then there's a signature. So this is what an exit memo looks like.